Good evening. I now call the March 28th meeting of the Wallingford-Swarthmore School Board to order. In opening, as you're willing and able, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I would like to start by asking Ms. Vigor to please take the roll call vote. Or, I'm sorry, the roll call. I added a V on the end, sorry.
We're gonna vote.
All righty.
Dr. Grandy?
Here.
Mr. Henry?
Here.
Ms. Holbert?
Here.
Mr. Cudis?
Here.
Ms. Lentz? Ms. Vogt?
Here.
Ms. Whitsett?
Here.
Ms. Wachowski-Smith?
Here.
Ms. Walkman?
Here.
Mr. Berman?
Here.
Dr. Marseille? Ms. Sudarshan?
Here.
Ms. Walkman, you have 8 voting members present.
Thank you. We'll begin our evening. Ms. Sudarshan, with your student representatives report.
With 23 school days, March is by far the longest month of the school year. There are no breaks, no days off, but somehow I managed to power through each week. I was lucky enough to find something to look forward to. The month started off with Read Across America Night at NPE. Teachers, administrators, and other special guests read to students who then got to do activities and find new books that they might enjoy. The other elementary schools also celebrated by dressing up as their favorite characters and read throughout the day. NPE is ending March with STEAM Night, which is actually happening right now. The kids are able to go to different stations to learn about everything from trusses to the function of our brains. The high school instrumentalists had a very successful winter concert earlier this month, and then half of them left to go to Orlando. I would tell you about how Orlando was, but sadly I was stuck at school. Besides, I'm sure the band kids have already told you how much fun they had. I mean, that's pretty much all they talked about at school anyway, so. These aren't the only artists that have been showcased this month. Tomorrow is the reception for senior Gabe Lawson, the recipient of the George Slick Fellowship. He has been working hard for the past few years and is super excited to be able to share his pieces. This showcase will be at the Community Arts Center from 5 to 7 tomorrow. You'll also be able to see the Art of WSSD exhibition on display at the Art Center until April 29th. The Unified Bocce team not only qualified for the state tournament, but also got 4th place. The wrestling team also did extremely well at their state tournament. The Strathaven speech and debate team recently went to multiple district tournaments, and they even championed one of them. These district tournaments acted as qualifiers for various national tournaments that are going to be in person this year. 13 people qualified to the NCFL national tournament in DC, and 10 people qualified to the NSDA tournament in Louisville, Kentucky. This is the biggest group that has gone to an in-person national tournament in the history of our team. Hopefully, we'll do just as well at nationals. Last, but certainly not least, the high school hosted the first ever International Day. Seniors Joyce Huang and Zach Sweeko planned the entire event and put together an amazing assembly that celebrated all cultures. Students dressed in traditional clothing and performed dances, sang, and gave speeches in front of the entire school. Seeing the reactions to this assembly made me realize how important it is for the student body to see performances from our peers. Learning from and talking to each other is so much easier than being talked at by adults. I strongly believe that International Day should become a district-wide event. Students from each school could perform, or we could get high school students to go over and perform at the other schools. We need to make sure that success doesn't come at the expense of students' kindness and cultural competency. And expanding the scale of this event will be the perfect next step.
Ms. Sudarshan, thank you so much for the report, for all the awesome things that are going on. And even though the band trip might have been the talk of the town, all I've heard about is International Night. And I was able to watch about half of it so far on the YouTube video, and it was really, truly amazing. So for anyone that hasn't seen it yet, I still recommend that you do. The students were amazing, and it was really inspiring. With that, Dr. Marseille, we'll turn to you for the superintendent's report.
Yes, thank you. I want to piggyback on that with, though I have a short update for you. Suprasia, you made reference to how long the month is, but it needed to be that long for all the accolades that you spoke about a few minutes ago. And I'll say this, and I'm going to put my my board members on the spot. We did not talk about this, but I absolutely will do everything in my power to make sure that International Day is spread across the district and it becomes a staple for all of us to celebrate. I think it is something that we should do during the day. I think we give an opportunity for parents who are unable to make it to come out in the evening as well. All of our students should have the opportunity to represent. I want to tell you that I was excited to see traditional dance, to traditional poetry, and the sharing of identity. I went to jump on stage. I challenged some of my my colleagues as some of the teachers were walking out of the auditorium. And I was like, we can do a dance routine like that, right? Can we do something like that? I said, can we start practicing now? And they're like, all you gotta do is ask. So I think many of them are really excited and ready to do that. So I'm hoping that when the time comes, my teammates will honor that and allow us to make official recognition that we give the opportunity for every school to represent that and give the opportunity for our community members to come out and watch that, because I think it's a phenomenal experience. But I also want to share that though it wasn't at the high school, and I know it's March, but Ms. Cobbs and her team did celebrate Black History Month assembly. Right, I know you like thinking, wait a minute, February, March, right? But you know, we had to move that, and it was absolutely as spectacular as well. I think that is another opportunity for us to showcase the multiple identities within this district and celebrate that. So I'm hoping that moving forward, we can make that a district-wide event, make that an evening event, so everyone can come and celebrate that as well. But yes, it was a long month, but it was needed with all the accomplishments and wonderful stories that are happening in this district. And we'll talk a little bit about those stories and how they are being recognized in a second. So there's a number of items. I'm going to be really quick because tonight we have 3 focus topics that we're going to talk about. I want to thank Dr. Heinley for bringing his team of teachers here who are going to share with us the wonderful things happening at an MPE. Suprasia, you're correct when you made a reference to that STEAM night is tonight. So we're going to get you going first so you can get out there and watch and support the students and families who are there. We're going to have Hanover come in and share really high level our report that we presented last month. It would not be the same amount of slides because that information is available on our website, but we want to take the opportunity to share that. And then we're going to briefly talk about our health and safety plan, some of the things we've been discussing, thinking about, and Ms. Sweeney is going to come and share some of that information with you as well. And as we continue to move forward with the end of the school year, we still continue to have very different perspectives from community members about where we are. Some extremely concerned with mask optional and saying, hey, we need to be more mindful. Others who are saying enough is enough. Everything's fine. Can we just please take off all the masks and eliminate social distancing and all that other stuff and come back to a sense of normalcy. So even as we are trying to move a little further away from the pandemic, there still seems to be very different perspectives on the way in which we think about not only obviously students' physical safety, but also a lot of questions about social emotional safety as well. But we'll share a little bit about what we've been thinking and what we have been seeing. But I want to talk about the communications audit. As many of you know, we are on a sequence of audits that will help inform our thinking, that will lead to development of a strategic plan. This board had approved a contract with NSPRA, National School Public Relations Association, to come and help the district think about the way in which we communicate and its effectiveness. And as part of that, very similar to previous audits, we're going to have a number of opportunities for our community members to have a voice, our faculty and staff to have a voice in that process. Relatively soon, there will be a survey that will be going out, and we're going to encourage everyone to please take no more than 10 minutes, does not take more than 10 to 12 minutes to complete that Likert survey, just to get your perspectives on the way in which the district communicates, how you like to receive that communication, what things we need to improve. So we look forward to that. Then on April 18th, we're going to begin focus groups. Now the focus groups are limited number of individuals. There are 10 focus groups, no more than 12 per focus group. And we're going to try to get a cross sample of our community as part of that focus group. We have a focus group for elementary staff, we have a focus group for secondary staff, we have a focus group for parents and other groups as well to give their perspective and their voice in that conversation. So we're really excited about the audit and connecting that with our equity audit that we're still unpacking the data, and talk a little about that later. And obviously our curriculum audit that's coming out later at the end of the school year that will inform our conversation as well. But as we are talking about communications, what's really exciting is the fact that the district has been recognized for its communication efforts. So we want to give credit where credit is due and thank Deirdre Abramson for promoting the district. We entered into a contest where the district was recognized in 3 categories: award for excellence for the stories in which we share on social media. Some of you are looking and thinking about some of those powerful stories. They're wonderful stories across this district, but the Pennsylvania School PR Association recognized those stories as awards of excellence, awards of honor, and awards of merit, and the communication that's happening within our social media threads, specifically Facebook and Instagram. So yes, as we are looking to improve our communication, there are those who are acknowledging the great communications and the promoting of the stories happening in the district. I wanted to bring attention to the digital safety seminar that is taking place. And I think all of our parents through our principal's e-blast received something about that. There's so much that information that's shared in that particular e-blast. My whole superintendent's report can just be pulling out some of that information, but I did want to bring attention to this. Our middle school HSA parents who are facilitating this, extremely important in terms of better understanding or giving you more toolkits with the impact of obviously technology, the impact of social media and what that is doing, continues to do to our students, and maybe as much as they're enjoying it, some of the pros and cons. And I think that this is going to be an extremely important conversation as we know as adults, I know as superintendent, our students are still learning exactly what is appropriate when it comes to communicating via social media. If you recall the days when that didn't exist, it took a long time for a story to catch wind. A disagreement between 2 people tend to be a disagreement between 2 individuals. In a nanosecond, a picture is taken, a statement is written, and hundreds, if not thousands, are reading that at the same time. So it's wonderful tools in terms of parents to think about what additional strategies do they have when it comes to engaging in conversation. There's also one that's being held for our students, obviously more importantly, but maybe as important in terms of we need both our parents and guardians to see what role they can play at home, and then our students understanding what role they play in the impact of that process. And we've seen too many times where, unfortunately, stories where a 2011 social media post now is coming back for the individual who didn't mean that, or it's not what they interpret is not who they are now. And we want to make sure our students don't fall into some of those and other traps as well. So I hope you have the opportunity to attend that for the parents on 3/31. I also want to share a little bit about our community of explorers. If you recall, last calendar year, the school district did provide an opportunity as we were transitioning back to provide a summer experience for our current kindergarten and grade 4 students. This is going to work a little bit different. As a result, we're in a different situation, and we are going to really prioritize based on data some of our current students who may need additional supports. And we're only obviously limited to capacity and the number of staff that we can have, but it is not compared to last calendar year, I believe, Dr. Masakowski, that it was anyone who can attend. Now we're trying to target specific group of students in terms of need. That information is going to be coming out relatively soon. So through I think conferences and through parent-teacher conferences as well. So you hear a little bit more about that, but I wanted to bring that up. Actually, I think one of my board members said, "Can you please say a few words about that?" So I wanted to make sure that that I shared that and give the heads up for those particular families. And then want to mention, obviously, unfortunately, we do have to take the PSSAs. They are a snapshot. We'll share more about that in our next Ed Affairs meeting, but want to let everyone know that unfortunately, a significant amount of time is taken up for testing. And though we want our students to perform well, it's not the only measure. We wish there were more opportunities for that, but individuals look at those scores and oftentimes make decisions about which community, maybe too heavily, but they make decisions about that, knowing that because we have new families who are moving in every day and registering. And when they say, what is the reputation of your institution? And they tend to go to that area where we try to say, well, it gives a holistic picture of who we are as an institution. But we want to share those dates that are coming up in April, and also our next Educational Affairs meeting. We invite you to that meeting. It is going to be a robust conversation around data. If you love data, and I mean if you love data, you need to come to this meeting, and I'll tell you why. Because we have 4 areas in which we're going to share information. In one of those areas, for example, for the MAP data, we have over 67 slides. For the equity data, we have 150 slides. For the PA Future Ready, we have around 30 or 40. For PSSA's current, historical, that's another 50. Obviously, we can't show 422 slides. Now, we will give the board all of that for their wonderful leisure in reading as they make decisions, right? It's going to be a big packet, but the ed team, Dr. Jones and Dr. Masakowski and I have been, and others who are working in the background to put all this data together as well for us and help us interpret it. We're trying to condense that into a manageable hour and 20-minute presentation with questions to follow after that. So we really would love for you to come back. We'll make the entire data deck available for those individuals, but we're not presenting the 300 slides, but we will make that available for individuals for their review. And then our facilities and finance on the 20th. And then what many have been waiting for, probably a little too late, is some R&R, some real R&R with the arrival of spring break in there as well. And if you have a chance to go away, please do so. We are going away. Cheyenne said enough is enough. She picked a spot in Jamaica, and that is where we're going. I remember my vacation was in the backyard, kicking rocks. So congratulations to her in terms of that, in terms of process. But nonetheless, it is time to exhale. It is an opportunity to rejuvenate as we come back from that break with really somewhat of a really quick end of the school year once you come back from spring break. And that concludes my superintendent's report.
I think I'm exhausted just listening to all the things that are coming up. Everyone is going to need a break. Thank you very much for all the information, Dr. Marce. With that, I think we want to move right into our focus topic with Mr. Heinley and the team, so we can get you back to school, unfortunately.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I've had a few presentations in the last 2 years, but it's been 3 or 4 since we've been here to celebrate our students and our kids. So really excited to go back to the reasons why we all chose education. Very quickly, I do want to go back to Saprasia and her comments about March. It has been a long month. I had a staff meeting. I said there's 2 times in the year where you get about 5 or 6 weeks. Great instructional time, but at the end of it, you're exhausted. So the teacher's done a great job. The students are coming in every day, mostly smiling, and we're doing everything we can to provide them a warm and safe environment. But going back to Saprasia, she's a former NPE grad. So seeing her tonight, we are immensely proud of her and seeing her school board reports. I remember her when she was about this big. So seeing her now really brings a smile to our faces, those who remember Saprasia. So I'm going to jump right in. Thank you, Dr. Marce. Good evening, Board of School Directors, members of the community, and fellow members of the administration. As I said, it's my pleasure to be back here tonight for the first time in quite some time to celebrate the staff and the students of Nether Providence Elementary. As I said, it's truly exciting to talk about accomplishments, and tonight, celebrating the voices of our students once again. The school update tonight is focused on community and how individual voices can create and inspire by working together. We continue at NPE to work together to create an inclusive environment with a sense of belonging for all students, staff, and community members. So with me tonight, I am proud to have Leslie Wagner, 4th grade teacher with me, Mary Kahanowitz, a reading specialist, and Mary Kate Peterson, 5th grade teacher at NPE. Dave Mendel would be here as well, but he is busy presenting at STEAM Night, so I'll be getting to see him in a few moments back at NPE. So after a brief spring update on events from me, our staff will highlight a new tradition that we are hoping to continue this year and well into the future at NPE, an activity which will continue to bring many voices together to create a work of art through written expression. Got it. There we go. There we go. Brief spring update. So as you know, we are inching closer to what I would call normalcy at school. We're not quite there, but we've had quite a few events in the last few months that are bringing us ever closer. And I'm going to highlight just a quick couple so you have an idea of some of the events we've had. We had an author visit in February, Kelly Starling Lyons, and she did whole school assemblies, I should say K to 2 and 3 to 5, but all students had the opportunity to hear about her book. And her book is called Sing a Song, How Lift Every Voice and Sing Inspired Generations. And basically, the book details and describes how a song has provided inspiration and solace for generations of Black families. The song has been sung during major moments of the civil rights movement and at family gatherings and college traditions. So we'd like to thank Kelly Starling Lyons for sharing her gift and story with our students. And again, going with the theme of bringing that voice, and that's what tonight's presentation is going to be. And also, Read Across America. Read Across America Night has been one of our most looked forward to events in the past 5, 6, 7 years. We did have students come in and pick up books, and they raced home to go online and choose which read aloud they would like to see, which did give students an ability to see more guest readers this year. Usually you'd be able to see 2. I did hear that Dr. Marseille did okay. You can see right there on the second row. You had a few viewers. I think I still had you maybe 2 to 1, but you had a few. You had a few. That's an unofficial count. But it's a wonderful opportunity for our students to see, superintendent, principal, teachers, parents, community members. So just another wonderful event that we had at NPE. And many thanks to our parent volunteers who really put that together for us. And just upcoming, obviously, STEAM night. We have about 17 tables set up, community members sharing their expertise with our students. So another wonderful night. Originally was to be outside. I think we made out very well by being able to distance ourselves, but have it inside for tonight. So we're excited about that. Parent-teacher conferences are coming up next week, so we're excited to have the opportunity to share all of our data points as well as our social emotional experiences with our students, with parents at the end of next week. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Wagner, who is going to talk about the origins of tonight's real focus topic, which is NPE's creation of a homegrown poem.
Hi, I'm Leslie Wagner. I teach 4th grade at NPE, and I have never used a clicker before, so let's see what happens. No, that's the red button. Play. This little arrow. All right. So the inspiration behind this activity that, as Mr. Heinley said, we hope to become a tradition at NPE is this amazing person named Kwame Alexander, who many of you may have heard of. He is a poet, an educator, an author, a thinker, a speaker. He's an amazing person. And I'm going to read a quote to you that's on this slide because it speaks to his passion for poetry. The power of poetry is that you can take these emotionally heavy moments in our lives and you can distill them into these palatable, these digestible words and lines and phrases that allow us to be able to deal and cope with the world, he says. I think it's one of the reasons why young people love reading novels in verse. It's because on a very concrete level, it's not that many words, so it's not that intimidating to me. There's so much white space. And one of the things that Kwame Alexander that I have come to learn about that he does is something, is a way that he shares his passion for poetry by producing what is referred to as community sourced poetry. So you might hear him on National Public Radio. He reaches out to listeners on public radio. I don't know if it's monthly or every 2 months or something. And he, it could be talking about a real life event. And, he does write about heavy moments in our lives, but poetry can be written about any moments in our lives. He has sometimes used a prompt, a quote. He's sometimes used a prompt, a season. He has sometimes used picture prompts, and he reaches out to listeners on public radio. And they write in. So all over the country, he receives these submissions, these people's written expression. They can be poems, they can be lines, they can be paragraphs, really whatever a person wants to submit. And he takes them all, and from that collection of writing, he chooses lines or words or phrases, and he creates this poetry. So he's not the author of all of these words, but he puts them together and arranges these words into poetry. And it's pretty amazing. In 2021, in July, the Civil Rights Memorial Center in Montgomery, Alabama, reopened. And they reached out to Mr. Alexander and they said, we want you to create a community source poem for the reopening of the Civil Rights Memorial Center. So from across the country, students, I believe it was really open to K-12 students. I'm not entirely positive of the grade levels in which he reached out to, but he promoted it to students, teachers, parents, and children across the country and received nearly 1,000 poems for the project. And from those, he took lines and he created a poem called A Civil Community. And it was hanging, I believe, in the entrance of, I have not been to this place, the Civil Rights Memorial Center in Montgomery, as an exhibit. And you can Google it and go online, and it's pretty moving and awesome. And his prompt for that was to ask people to respond to, the prompt is something like share your vision of America the Beautiful. And it's really compelling. A quote by Mr. Alexander talks about how this poem speaks in voices from people of all walks of life. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty inspiring. And I've thought about it for the last couple of years. I've talked to Mr. Hunley about it. Like, what do you think? Can we do something like this at MPE? And then I talked to some teachers. And so that's where all of this came from. And I just feel like we have to give credit to where credit is due. So we transformed the idea of community source poetry into school source poetry. And our homegrown poems are invitations. They're invitations to students. They will be soon invitations to students, faculty, and staff. And who knows, maybe soon to beyond that. But right now, our first homegrown poem was an invitation for the students K-5 as an optional activity for teachers during a very busy time of the school year. Invitations to think, to write, to share, to help these kids see themselves as thinkers, writers, and artists with something valuable to contribute. I think the experience of teaching and learning through COVID, our writing skills have suffered. And any way we can inspire these kids to get excited about writing and put words to page, we're constantly looking for those opportunities. It's an invitation to offer their words, their artistic expression, and to join the school community in a shared experience. So our NPE Homegrown Poetry team, Mr. Heinley already let you know who we are. And so we are going to continue to try to grow this tradition at NPE. So our first homegrown poem was written in February. Again, we offered it as an optional, kicking this off as a new thing. Let's try this for people who are interested. And students responded to a prompt about reading, and you'll hear more about that in a little bit. From the voluntary submissions, we received submissions from 114 students in grades 2 through 5. Our poem's title is NPE Reads, was created using words from 33 different students, and then we opened it up to also include more students through their artwork. One of our 5th grade students created an amazing logo that we'll be using for our homegrown poetry in the future. And I'll turn it over to Mary Kate Peterson.
Thank you, Leslie. Is it the top button that I use to click? I'm also unfamiliar with clickers. Okay. Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Kate Peterson. I'm a 5th grade teacher at NPE, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about how we implemented this activity in the classrooms. So classroom teachers provided open-ended prompts to our students to get them to think about their own experiences as readers. And I'll show you some of those prompts right here. We encourage them to jot down their own ideas on the physical aspect of holding a new book in their hands, the anticipation of not knowing what's on the unread pages ahead of you, and the desire for your teacher to read just one more page. So after we had the kids reflect on their experience as readers, we encouraged them to choose their favorite, again, lines, words, paragraphs to submit into either a Google Classroom form that we had, or for the younger kids, we had them just write them right on chart paper, and we could kind of put those together. And of course, as always, we differentiated according to grade level so that fifth graders could write their ideas at a much higher level, and the younger kids could just write their excitement about learning to read and their excitement about having new books in their hands. And Mary, when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Mary Kohanowitz. I'm a reading specialist at NPE. When Leslie first brought up this concept of a homegrown poem at our faculty meeting, I was thinking, oh, read across America. So we decided on the topic of reading. When the whole poem was complete, we also thought we wanted to implement different artistic works that could possibly frame our poem, which we were hoping to display for our Read Across America evening. So Leslie did find these little mini books, and I gave them to teachers who gave them to students who were interested in decorating those. And then they became the border for our poem. It was displayed during our Read Across America evening. And we also had these bookmarks, which I handed out to you, available to the parents that were there and the children there. And then, of course, the teachers in our school had access to them. During the week for Read Across America, we had some of our poem contributors, students, read the poem during morning announcements. Originally, we did want those students to read to you this evening, but a scheduling conflict, we decided to record those students reading the poem. So you'll be watching that. But we also wanted to highlight the artist who created the NPE Homegrown logo. So there's going to be a brief interview with Evelyn Smith, the artist. And Paul, if you want to. Okay. Right now.
Hello and welcome to a reading of NPE's first homegrown poem. We wanted to read in person at this meeting, but our STEAM night is the same night and we didn't want to miss any of those activities. My name is Tyler, and myself and fellow readers have contributed our thoughts and feelings to this poem on our feelings about reading. Readers, please introduce yourself.
Huck, 5th grade. Dominique, 5th grade.
I'm Lee, 5th grade.
Isla Samlin, 4th grade. Sophie Ferger, 2nd grade. Clara West, 3rd grade. Gisela Huff, 4th grade.
Enjoy.
Open a book. What might be waiting?
A breath of fresh air, dragons, sword fight, action, perilous plots, an amazing twist, answers.
Go ahead, take hold, be bold. A favorite book is like a piece of pure gold. Imagine, wonder, what will happen next? Float away, be curious, explore a majestic world, wrap up in a warm blanket of words. Let the words settle and surround you.
Like living in the clouds, feel calm, warm with anticipation, crawl between the pages and get absorbed. Sink deeper and deeper into your chair. Feel safe, relax without worries. Just listen.
Except when the chapter ends at the best part and the book is closed.
I just can't wait. It's a timeout called at the end of a football game. On the edge of my seat. Read more, read more. What exciting thing happens next? Please, just one extra page.
Open a book. What might be waiting? A portal, a tunnel to another life, a surprise, winding roads of dark and light, fairies, witches, wizards, and sloths, anvils falling from the sky.
Rumbling oceans, tea parties, secrets, a box of joy, a treasure chest filled with candy for my brain, a story I might hold on to forever. Go ahead, take hold, be bold. A favorite book is like a piece of pure gold.
Hi, my name is Jordan Berry. I'm a 5th grade student at NPE. Today I would like to ask a few questions to the artist who made the Homegrown Poem logo. At 5th grade student Evelyn Smith. Evelyn, how did you get the idea for the logo?
I didn't just want to do a pot with a flower growing out of it. I had to incorporate the poem in Homegrown Poem, so I decided to make the pot into a bookshelf with a flower growing out of it.
How long have you considered yourself an artist?
Probably since I could fit a crayon or a pencil in my hand.
What do you see yourself doing in the future?
I would like to be a biologist because I love nature and plants, and then I could draw the animals and plants I see.
Thank you so much for your creative logo.
Okay, and finally, next steps. We're obviously planning to continue this. We're looking to add another prompt later in the spring, in which we'll plan to invite students and staff to participate. And we believe that this activity clearly encourages and highlights the individual voices of our community, which merged together can become a piece of art that expresses the creativity of the Nether Providence community. I'd like to thank the staff for their creativity, their vision, their dedication and enthusiasm for our students, and also to thank our parent community and our students for, the students for their hard work, their creativity, and the parents who have supported us through some good times and some difficult times, some challenges the last few years. But at the end of the day, the students, the staff, everyone involved at NPE has continued to look at the individual voices, and NPE is the place to be. And I couldn't be prouder of being part of the community, and look forward to giving you an update and to see how our individual voices are creating one inclusive community. So thank you. And if you have any questions for the staff, so thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and for sharing all of this. This has been kind of a particularly good end to what wasn't the world's greatest day. So I really, really appreciate it. And I love the poem. I'm looking at some of the words and like the treasure chest filled with candy for my brain. I love it. Absolutely love it. So I just want to thank you so much for the leadership in pulling this together. It's awesome. Does anyone have any other comments or questions they'd like to ask?
Yeah, I'll just say, I really loved the process that you put together and the poem itself. I mean, it's funny because I'm reading a book right now that I don't really read it until the very end of the day, but it happens to be a book that every chapter has a twist. And I'm like, oh, I just want to go on to the next chapter, but I'm exhausted, So I have this feeling like the kids do, what might be waiting. And I love the idea of the fairies, witches, wizards, and sloths, So thank you so much.
Yes, I just want to say thank you again, too. This was incredibly inspiring.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that and providing that opportunity. I have to apologize. I'm not familiar with Kwame's work, but because you brought that to my attention, I definitely will seek it out. This idea around community poetry is awesome, and what you did. I love when we have an opportunity to interview children and they say, how long have you been an artist? And as long as I can hold the crayon. And I'm like, that's a long time, right? So thank you very much for what you're doing and the unique opportunities that you bring to our students and to our families. It is a place to be.
Okay, Dr. Marseille, would you like to introduce our Hanover research then presentation?
Well, it's hard to pivot from that, right? You should have ended it at that. But we wanted to give an opportunity in this session because last month, members of the Hanover team provided an extensive analysis of our equity findings. And we wanted to give the opportunity for those who were unable to make that meeting, and though the presentation is available for review, we felt it was important to take the next 20 minutes or so and just give really an abridged version of that. And I know the Hanover team, thank you for waiting for us as we had our students go first. So we appreciate your flexibility in allowing us to switch that order. So with that, without ado, let me pass it on to the Hanover team, and I'll let you guys get started and provide us an overview of some of the findings.
Great, thank you, Dr. Marseille. Am I coming clearly through? Can you all hear me? Great. All right, I'll share my screen in a minute. I'd like to introduce you all to Julie Shenenfield, my colleague here at Hanover. My name is Dr. Matt Ragone. I am a senior advisor here at Hanover, and I worked intimately with the data audit with a few of my colleagues here at Hanover, and I'll show my screen here. Make sure you guys can see this. How does that look?
Looks good.
Great. Okay, as Dr. Marseille said, this is a somewhat abbreviated version of the more extensive report that we gave a few weeks ago, and where we are talking really about summarizing the equity audit that was conducted end of last year up till now. The three parts of this audit we'll go over very quickly. I think you all have the presentation that I'm sharing with you tonight, and you also have the previous presentation. So we'll go through this a little bit, and I'll save some time at the end for questions and answers. Basically, my job here at Hanover is to lead the research in whatever methodology we're doing. My expertise are in qualitative research, but I work with quantitative and survey teams to help put this analysis together. My background's in education. I've spent 28 years in a high school setting here in one district in Northern Virginia, and started working at Hanover not too long ago. And just briefly about Hanover, we work all over the country. We're a research firm based in Arlington, Virginia. We do both higher ed and K-12 research for over currently right now for about 300 different school districts, and have in the past worked with over 700 school districts across the nation. We do a lot of different methodologies, and most recently, forgive me for speeding through this part because you probably don't want to see this, but a lot of the work right now is in DEI, trying to discover the district's equity conditions. And that's what we tried to do here in 3 different studies. So this presentation is, as I said, a summary of those three research projects. So basically, we conducted an equity audit that included a data analysis and resulting dashboard, a diversity and equity and inclusion survey, and focus groups. These were conducted between December 2021 and January 2022, and for the last couple of months, we've been reporting out on those topics. The triangulation of the data in the mixed method study is vital to understanding the current equity condition of your district. That's what we're really going for, to understand the current equity condition. The audit we conducted is based on 4 research questions that you see here. What is the equitable access to academic programs, equitable and welcoming learning environments for students, and concurrently welcoming work environment for teachers and staff, and finally, any key practices in district leaderships that might consider district leadership might consider to improve the equity climate. So what we have here at the end are recommendations, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of these studies if you feel I'm going too fast. So basically, the dashboard includes several ways. This is the equity scorecard. We collected student outcome data from 2015 to 2021. You can see notable blips in data because of COVID. We see that all over the country when folks are collecting student outcome data. The dashboard that reports the data includes several different ways to visualize the data, and I'll share some of those examples tonight. Some of the data points that we collected here: enrollment data, demographic data, academic and behavioral outcome data, and participation in enrollment data. And you'll see some examples in a minute. The diagnostic survey that we call the DEI diagnostic was conducted in January with over 2,000 students, parents, and staff participating. That is an incredibly robust turnout for a survey like this. We do these things all over the country, and I can tell you that's a pretty robust participation rate. The results are displayed also in a separate dashboard where users can segment and filter the data to find out more clearly what different groups think about different ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And finally, we conducted 5 focus groups that include students, staff, and parents, and to get more deeply at what people are thinking and feeling on these important issues. And that triangulation of data is really how we come to a lot of our key findings and major themes that we're pulling out here. So what does all this research tell us? A few slides ago, I shared the 4 research questions. So let's take a look at the first one. So academic tracking. So what themes emerge when we examine equitable access to programs? So there's 3 things. Academic tracking locks students in. Tracking is kind of a taboo word in education and has formally been eliminated from practice, but it still exists as a concept in most district cultures. So in most districts, it exists as part of the culture, and it makes it kind of hard to get rid of. It's that idea of a kid is where he is and he's going to stay there until he catches up, but it's hard for him to catch up is kind of the idea that we're kind of fighting against almost, So we also see the access to advanced coursework as a major theme, also a common theme across the country, and barriers to parent involvement is another major theme. And how to increase parent involvement and give all parents opportunities to advocate for their students when they're so busy is certainly a difficult challenge for any community. But those are the 3 that sort of bubble to the top. Sorry. So let's look at these key findings about tracking. Grade 3 is when state standardized measures begin measuring or assessing academic proficiency. And we see gaps between traditionally marginalized student groups and other groups just at that, immediately at grade 3. Reading proficiency is measured earlier in students' lives through a variety of metrics, mostly local metrics. And as early as kindergarten, we see gaps in reading. And the data shows these gaps persist into later grades. So reading, according to the research, is fundamental, just like that old commercial, and therefore it impacts other subjects, including math. So very, very important to try and get a hold of those gaps as early as you can get them. Now, I want to show you what the data analysis portion of the audit looks like, but I don't expect you to see everything on the screen. I just want to give you a glimpse of how it's organized. So when you do get to see it, you'll be oriented. So this is what the dashboard looks like. And what we see here are student groups along the top. So different student groups by race, by program participation, and student outcomes on the left. So the color-coded boxes represent over or underrepresentation in student outcomes for each student group. And I'll explain that a little bit later with some more specific examples, and you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. But that's basically how it's laid out. Student groups across the top, student outcomes across the rows, the left axis. The dashboard, the other tool in the dashboard, this is what we call the side-by-side tool. One of my favorite tools because you can really dig in to data, and I get lost in the data a little bit in a good way. And This allows you to compare student groups or student outcomes. And the user can use filters along each side to come up with a group or an outcome of interest. So for example, in this screen, I selected math proficiency and I filtered it by Black students and white students. So I filtered white students on the right and Black students on the left and got those outcomes. Again, right now, we're not interested in the actual outcomes. I'm just orienting you to the slides, and we'll get to some of these outcomes in a minute. Similarly, here's another gap that I looked at. So I cleared all the filters, and then I filtered economically disadvantaged and compared to not economically disadvantaged. You can also compare economically disadvantaged to the entire group and get a different setting, a different result rather. So these are just sort of the tools that we have at our disposal to figure out which kids need which services. So some of the key findings regarding advanced coursework, which is another theme that emerged. Our study finds that Black, Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, and LEP students are underrepresented in accessing the highest level of learning. In other words, we would expect Black students, for example, because of their population, the percentage of population of Black students in the district to equal that population in advanced levels of learning. Instead, the survey, we see not enough enrollment in those advanced courses for Black students in that example. Also, survey participants mostly agree that teachers encourage students to take challenging courses. It's a pretty high number, 64%. The question is that enough? And another question is teacher encouragement the only factor in opening up these opportunities? Certainly, teachers encouraging students to take classes is a huge opportunity gate. But research also has a lot of theories on why gaps exist in creating opportunities. So there's a lot more to learn about this phenomenon. Barriers to parent involvement are the third theme that emerged about access to academics. Basically, we found that a good percentage of parents think the school works with parents to reduce barriers. The focus groups bore this out as well. The mixed method study here is important because the survey shows you one thing. For example, about one-half or nearly half of parents perceive the schools as supporting students. So about half see them as not supporting students. But the focus groups tell us a little bit more about why they feel this way. So it seems, based on focus groups, that simply accommodating working parents when scheduling events or just thinking about the time that you schedule events might have a really big impact on school support perceptions. So that will make it to one of our recommendations that I'll share with you in a little bit. So the second research question, what are the major key findings that come out regarding efforts to provide equitable and welcoming learning environments for students? Three themes emerge here: discipline, how the district addresses cultural diversity, and when bigoted behaviors appear, what do we do? So we see the status of equitable and welcoming environments most clearly in the scorecard, the example I showed you earlier. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail so you can understand the scorecard in a little bit deeper level. So in this part of the scorecard, we show the early warning indicator outcomes. Things like behavior, did students have a disciplinary incident? Did they have a suspension? Did they fail a course? Those are, by early warning indicators, we're looking at things that we want to know about students at very early ages so they can have access to opportunities later in their academic career. The green boxes you see here show student groups that are underrepresented in certain outcomes. These outcomes are about behaviors mostly. The orange boxes show student groups that are overrepresented in certain outcomes. So just a little bit more detail about this representation index. With any quality equity audit, we want to understand the extent to which student groups are represented equitably in all the categories and student outcomes. So a representation index compares the share of students who achieve an outcome, say passing the state math assessment, for example, with that group's share of the student population. In other words, we expect those numbers to match, just very, very basically. So for example, if the Black student population for any district is 60%, and their gifted classes are comprised of only 33% Black students, then we say that Black students are underrepresented in that group. You would expect them to be 60%. So the example of underrepresentation is on the left side of your screen here. The example of overrepresentation is if Black student population is only 33% and gifted classes are comprised of 60% Black students, then we say Black students are overrepresented, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it just shows you that they're exceeding the expectation. So one example here, so our data analysis team creates this index and it measures outcomes and compares that to the population of the student group. So in this example, Hispanic students are 4% of your student population. We would expect for that group student outcome, for any of that student's group's outcome to be about 4% for everything. Our analysis, however, shows that Hispanic students make up 8% of students who receive a suspension. So on this screen, we're showing them as overrepresented in having a suspension. Whoa, sorry. In another example, sorry about that. In another example, students who are economically disadvantaged are overrepresented in students who received a disciplinary incident. So what do we say about this? The key findings regarding discipline really are about the coming together of these three research studies. So for example, 45% of students who received a suspension were economically disadvantaged, 34% were Black. These are overrepresentations in our index. In other words, you don't have 45% economically disadvantaged in your community, and your Black population is well below 34%. Because of the national trend, it's important to look at other pieces of the mixed methods audit to fully understand the specific contextual factors within your district. In other words, the numbers that you're seeing here are not out of the norm. You're like many other districts in the nation. And that's why it's important to use those other studies to kind of triangulate the information. So for example, the survey tells us that there's a discrepancy in perceptions on discipline between high schoolers and middle school and elementary school parents and students. So in other words, high schoolers and their parents believe that discipline is more inequitable at that level. Middle school and high school, middle school and elementary school students tend to perceive discipline as equitable, conversely. And focus groups reveal the community thinks inconsistency in disciplinary action and consequences can be overcome by understanding cultural differences more deeply. That's one thing that comes out in their comments and focus groups. So let's look a little bit more closely about what people think about cultural diversity. So participants share stories in focus groups of their experiences with cultural events and have some criticisms of the way the district has handled events. However, it's really important to note here that the perception data requires a further study. We hear stories, but we want to look more deeply into how district has reacted to it. What other stories are out there? There's lots of people have a lot of stories, and you want to hear more about what's happening on a real personal level. On this slide, we show some examples cited with the focus groups. Again, it's not everything that's been happening in the district, just a few examples that came up in the groups of the challenges schools and districts face in promoting diversity and creating a welcoming environment. Also, the DEI survey says that a majority of respondents say students are often or very often talk with students from different backgrounds, which isn't great, but there's evidence here that there's a feeling of tolerance or really lack of fear about getting to know students that don't look like you, which is encouraging because we don't always see that across the nation. Focus group participants stress also the importance of district leadership in promoting and celebrating diversity. They can't do it without them, they say. They really want them to take the lead. Additionally, we also find from focus groups that there's a perception that some behaviors go unchecked. So specific examples here on the screen, and focus groups note things like teacher and student behaviors and how districts and schools can react or should react to incidents. We also cite here a recommendation, which is pretty common, to establish consistent and unambiguous policies and consistently enforce them. So the third research question: what are major themes that exist or that emerge regarding the district's effort to provide equitable and welcoming work environments for staff? Staff issues that emerge are about preparation, hesitancy, and diversity. Promoting the DEI work is also a national challenge. In Wallingford-Swarthmore, focus groups tell us they want to see more consistent work in these areas. They want to see professional learning opportunities, and they also note that they have colleagues who have expertise in DEI that should be called upon to help support this work. They really want to see this internal and grassroots movement accessing the internal resources that you have. So approaches like professional learning opportunities are really mid-range and long-range solutions that have really an important role in promoting DEI changes and innovations, vital to make long-term change. More acutely, however, and more immediately, participants want to see teachers and leaders address DEI issues as they arise. Firmly, unambiguously, immediately. The perception is rightly or wrongly, it's still a perception, is that we let things slide. And letting things slide gives tacit approval that we accept those behaviors that we're all trying to fight against. And finally, what key practices should the district adopt to address the things that we found in the audit? So the audit is designed to show the current equity condition, right? So what do we do about it? And the condition is by no means much different than we see around the country, but how do you address it? Certainly through professional learning, certainly through strong leadership and real structural change. And we get these ideas from both the research and suggestions from focus groups as well. So our recommendations include professional learning. Some of the high priority topics here that you see on your screen are common to professional learning across the district, across the nation, that we see as really having meaningful and necessary action for promoting DEI and kind of resetting the culture. Things like implicit bias training, anti-racism training, just knowing a little bit more about gender and sexual identity, cultural responsive teaching, things like that you see on your screen, behavior management, knowing the culture of students before you take action with behaviors, and just kind of understanding where they're coming from and why they might be acting out is really important. SEL and life skills are absolutely vital and being used throughout the nation to address, because they kind of have spillover into equity and diversity and inclusion quite a bit. If you're addressing students' social and emotional needs and their life skills, you're also addressing equity conditions in some certain cases. So nothing happens without district leadership support, and getting out in front of these issues is vital for district leaders. But district leaders can't do it alone, right? So there's not, it's not a question of pointing fingers or blaming things. It's just that community wants to see district leaders out in front, reacting against incidences, leading and participating in training. So not just mandating training, but actually participating in training. That's what staff want to see. Supporting staff who stand up courageously against incidents, for example. using internal human resources, as we had noted before. You have some expert DEI among your staff, use them. And responding to this audit with actionable programs and policies is what people want to see. And that, again, is based on focus group responses. And it's also something in the research, research says that giving a survey or collecting the data is not, is just one part of it. Reacting to the data that you get is vital to seeing real change. And then the final recommendation is there needs to be structural change. So by this, we're referring to creating teams, maintaining the teams that you've already created, hiring specialists or training up specialists, updating and expanding curriculum, reestablish, reset, recommit to equitable discipline policies and the enforcement of these policies. There are, and this is the last recommendation. I don't want to leave the presentation without really kind of noting this really important point. There are a lot of positives in this audit. It's probably very natural to focus on the negative because nobody's ever satisfied and we all want to improve in everything that we do. So for one thing, the community, it's noted on this slide, roundly applauds the equity audit. Everybody seems to be really excited about it in a good way. They understand that district leaders are committed to improving the climate and culture for all students. That's really clear. And it's also really clear that this community is extremely passionate about this work. I mean, the survey numbers were incredible. What people said in the focus groups were really passionate, emotional, and all that comes really comes through very loud and clear in the focus groups and in the survey. So there's a lot of huge positives that we don't normally see in districts, and we do this a lot around the nation. So the passion is there. So keep up the good work, keep taking the pulse of your community, keep engaging the research, not just a description of what you're doing, but engage the research in how best to improve the equity conditions. And you'll see these numbers go up and you'll feel it all over and in your whole. So I'll end there and turn it over to questions or reactions. I'm happy to go to any part of the presentation that you might want to go to. And I'll stop sharing until.
Matt, thank you so much. I'll open it up to questions from board members, but if I could, I think what I'd like to just start with is, first of all, there's obviously an enormous amount of information for us to be able to unpack as a district and as a board and as a community. And that was obviously just a highlight of key points. So we thank you for that, but there's so much more work to do. And to that point, you know, it's a starting point on a journey. And I'm just interested in your feedback and what you've seen across the country in terms of, I mean, my personal perception is this is a journey that actually doesn't ever end. But, you know, what kinds of expectations should we be setting for ourselves and our community about the timeframes in which one should imagine to see actual results and evidence of what we do in response to the findings?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would say it's based on a lot of different things. I wish I could just give you a number, like you want to increase, you want to decrease the disciplinary gap that you're seeing by 10% next year, 20% next year. But really that's going to be based on a lot of different things. It's first of all, and probably most importantly, based on your size and the demographics of your district. You have pretty low populations of certain groups. So the expectation to move that needle is going to be different based on the size of the population. So a strategic look at your current condition and setting goals is really going to be, or should be in the districts. I don't want to lecture to you or preach to you. I'll just say what we see in districts that have been successful in this are those that take a strategic look at their current condition and set midterm goals and long-term goals for each student group and each outcome. And that takes a lot of pre-work. You have to know what your staff is capable of. You have to know what data that you have and what data you don't have. So that's one piece. The other piece is really about mood, passion, culture of your district. How prepared is your community for addressing this work? Are they really, really energized in it? And then if they are, they can go quicker. If you have convincing to do, like a lot of our districts do, they have large and sometimes even larger populations, like whole state, you know, where it's 50-50 that don't even want to talk about this. Then you have to approach it a different way and be a little bit more patient. If your community is universally engaged in it and passionate about making the change, then you can go a little bit faster. I hope that helps. I feel like I dodged that question a little bit. Is there?
It was a little bit of a setup question, probably. But no, I think it's really important for us to recognize, like, the last thing I want us clearly to move and to do important work with the information, but I also want us to be thoughtful about how we do it, and not to the point, actually, one of the comments in there was about not being reactive all the time. We have been reactive thus far. So it's an opportunity to really sit back, unpack that data, and do this really thoughtfully and do it right, as opposed to just rushing in, which is not to say that we won't rush in and look at all of the data, but thoughtful and measured and strategic, I think, is really important. And we're lucky in some respects to have the education audit coming up, and we'll be able to triangulate results across a couple different really important audits that we're doing, help us to see those hotspots, if you will, across the 3 different audits that we're undertaking. So I'll stop talking and turn it to other board members who might want to ask some questions. Kevin?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, Matt, I just have a comment and a question. My comment was regarding the focus groups you mentioned, how enthusiastic they were. I concur. I attended one as well, and it was really engaging. I thought, was, to use your word. So I thought they were really good, those focus groups. Well, they were very well done. My question is, how big in your opinion, I guess, how big a factor is it about staff, teachers, administration being worried about addressing the sensitive subjects and getting it wrong, and so to avoid that, let's not do it at all, right? Let's not say anything, because I'm afraid if I want to do the right thing, I say it insensitively or incorrectly, and then I'm in trouble, right? Can you measure that? You get the feeling that we have that issue?
Yeah, can you measure it is a really good question, and we didn't come across any of that. We don't have any data on that. We didn't necessarily ask that specific question, and it didn't come up naturally or organically in the focus groups. But from experience, having been a teacher for over 13 years, that is absolutely what I was thinking about when I put myself in the place of what teachers have to deal with now. I mean, absolutely. I mean, because you're afraid of doing more harm than good because you don't know what to say or how to do it. Not realizing that you do a lot of harm by not reacting. So, training teachers up, and we talked about this with the district this morning, and it really kind of caught me by surprise that this is one of the first times I'm realizing this. When teachers say that I don't want to set that kid up for failure. I don't want to challenge him because I don't want to set my kid up for failure. I think really what teachers mean, and I speak for myself, what I was afraid of when I was teaching was I was afraid of failing. I wasn't afraid of the kid failing. I was afraid of failing. I didn't have the expertise to get that kid from point A to point Z. So that's a huge thing that we see all the time. And teachers, God bless them. I mean, they have a lot going on. They're afraid of what might come out them if they don't react like they're supposed to react. So that's what based on my experience and from talking with other districts, I do think that's absolutely something that needs to be explored. How do you measure that? That's a really good question. I think further focus groups or targeted focus groups with teachers and at different ability levels and teachers at different experience levels and at different levels, I mean, really could get at those experiences. And so I would think a qualitative thing is the best way to do that, because I couldn't think of of a data point to pull out to measure that. I hope that helps.
Other questions? Anyone else? I'll ask one other question, and this might be awfully specific, but there was a finding about recognition, I think, of a linguistic differences in IEPs. And I can't remember exactly which slide that was on. Is that ringing a bell to anybody? I was just curious about what that would even mean in the context of an IEP, and how are linguistic differences factored into an IEP? And maybe that's it for the administration. Slide 3. 30.
Let me pull it up here. I'm not recalling that specific
That's
data
okay.
point, so let me put it up.
Yeah, ignore it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it might be, my slide order might be a little bit different than the
okay.
one that you printed, but this is what I'm looking
Yeah,
at.
it's Matt, it's under cultural diversity, summary key findings regarding cultural diversity.
All right, is it this one?
Yes, it's that one.
Okay.
That example of ignoring linguistic differences in IEPs, and I was wondering what that might mean. Wasn't sure. Look, yeah, that would be fine. Do we want him to go up to the mic?
Dr. Sam, we need you to go to the microphone.
Yep. It's very long distance from the table to the microphone. Awkward.
So at first glance, what I would say to that is that for students and their families whose primary language is not English, we have an obligation to translate documents. These documents are extensive. It is a significant investment, but it's also very important that we translate them to the primary language. We also have IEP meetings where we have translation services at the table.
All right. Now I understand. Thank you. Other questions from board members? Okay, I think we're done. Dr. Marseille.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment if I may. And thank you, Matt and your team for helping put this together, but more importantly, helping us think through some possible next steps. But I do want to say a couple of things about this preliminary report and the full report that we will get very soon. And I'll piggyback a little bit with Ms. Walkman, your statement with regards to what are the expectations for moving the needle? How prepared are we as a community? I've been in multiple districts who have championed this work. Individuals who believe they're champions of this work. I've said this several times in multiple communications. I've said it here. And I continue to say, everyone wants change until they're asked to change. And the reality is this district, as well intended as it is, with the wonderful individuals that are here, with the wonderful staff and wonderful administrators and wonderful students, is this data only confirmed what many have been sharing. And though Hanover is extremely reputable, national, international organization, and this team was very specific in making sure that we had one of the best to come in and do the work, because we wanted to be unequivocally, undeniably, that this was not some mom pop shop who came in and just started throwing numbers together for individuals not ready to face the realities. We didn't get here from 2 years of data. We did not get here from 4 years of data. We didn't get here from 8 years of data. So it is going to take some time, but the concern is for those who continue to be marginalized and underserved, how long shall we wait? Well, I'll share with what I shared with a community member. I have 5 years on my contract, but tomorrow is not promised. I want to leave much better than I found it. So the question that all of us need to ask is the pace of change. What do you believe are non-negotiables? Is it acceptable that single-digit students are performing on a basic level assessment on per state standards? We just showed the PSSA results. We have PSSAs coming up. What's acceptable and what is a non-negotiable? When you delineate non-negotiables, you act very swiftly. When you say it is unacceptable that half of your population who earn a grade of a D or F represent a significant number of underrepresented students, meaning Black or IEP, then you say that there are practices that have to stop. If it's a non-negotiable, then you don't have 7 months to have a conversation about it. And what I've said, and I'll say this into this community, which I reside, not only work in, but I reside in, my daughter's here, is that there are some things is equivalent to if a house is on fire, I don't want to have a meeting for the next 45 minutes to discuss what the 20 individuals are going to do about that fire while there are individuals possibly inside. If not, definitely items that you cherish. And all as we discuss what we think, what we should be doing, what we want to do, those are certain non-negotiables that we need to determine that this, as much as we thought was a good practice, hurts a lot of children. And those children historically are Black, IEP, and economically disadvantaged. And the report shows unequivocally that those particular subgroups are overrepresented in all the factors that are bad, and underrepresented in all the things that this district espouses that they want to be the best at. So is it a non-negotiable for those in positions of authority, those with the expertise, to allow certain practices to continue as we try to galvanize individuals who may not see it the same way? As a parent, and I appreciate the social capital that I have, but I didn't always have that because I didn't have parents who would have that level of advocacy. So I'm not necessarily concerned about mine. I'm concerned about the others who don't have that same level of social capital, the wherewithal, the ability to engage in conversations in a room of educators that are well-intended, but sometimes when you walk in as a parent, you feel extremely intimidated. So parents have said, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to approach it. I don't know if they're blaming me. I'm trying my best. I need some support. So for me, it is about, are you ready to do this work? A lot of districts say they're ready to do this work. They give it a lot of lip service until they realize, I'm sorry, what do you mean that we're gonna have to detract all of our courses in order to give equity? What do you mean we're gonna remove some of these extremely biased prerequisites that continue to exist? What do you mean we're gonna have to think differently about that 4th grade math placement, that 5th grade class math placement? Right? We're in course selections right now. We're in placements right now. And guess what the data is doing? It's replicating the same thing for the next calendar school year. So for me, that's a non-negotiable. But I don't believe in having to have 65 meetings to discuss a non-negotiable. That is an inequitable, unfair practice that's been allowed to happen in this district for a dozen+ years. Enough is enough, where it's not doing it anymore. For me, those are the stance in which, when push comes to shove, as the superintendent, as a board of school directors, when are we going to draw a line in the sand, this collective group, and say, there are some non-negotiables, and this can't continue. And that's where we start. But the reality is this: for those who want the change now, and I appreciate that, it didn't happen yesterday. And the type of shifts that are needed, we're going to have to build structures for that. But there are some things that we need to eradicate immediately. In certain practices, we need to say enough is enough, because all the data shows it's inequitable. And the other day I was talking to a colleague, and I say, why do we use the term historically underperforming children? The state uses it. I'm gonna get a lot of negative emails after I say this one. I've been accustomed to them in my 9 months. So they don't do the same thing emotionally to me as they did before. So when is it when we say historically underperforming adults? Right? Me included. After years and years and years of gaps, at some point, you have different cohorts of children and you're still producing the same outcome. When does it shift? And as a classroom teacher, and I apologize for those who have shared the fact that they're afraid to have courageous conversations. I was never afraid to have a courageous conversation with my students, because I need to meet them where they were. And I didn't take a side, because I knew that's not my place inside the classroom. What I did was help students navigate what they were feeling, what they were expressing, and that I feel your pain, I see you, I understand you. The world's extremely difficult, but in here, in this moment in time, we all love you and appreciate you, and this is how we're gonna show you that. And we're gonna try to make ways in which others see you outside of this particular classroom. So no one should be afraid of loving and supporting their children and helping navigate through those conversations, or you allowing your students to see their own identity inside your classroom, regardless of nobody else is doing it, regardless if some superintendent or some board is not acknowledging it in a meaningful way, right? I didn't know who my board of directors were when I was a classroom teacher. In all due respect, I really didn't care. But I knew the needs of my children inside my classroom. But I also was balanced in the way in which they came in with their own identity and how I can support that, and how my 5 sections of 22 children fully understood who I was and where I was. And we have wonderful teachers who do that every single day. All right? But the reality is it shouldn't be a luck of the draw. And we need to be more consistent in the way that happens and that we remind ourselves that we're in the customer service business. So this to me is par for the course from my last district, the district I was in before that. The only difference about this is your willingness and your commitment in terms of what are non-negotiables. I have them, but that means absolutely nothing is as a collective group that we have them. So I am excited about the potential to shift this. And if there is a silver lining in, and though I appreciate Hanover's statement that there are some good things in here, I've unpacked the data every which way till Sunday with members of my team. The story, however we spin it, is the same thing. You have particular subgroups year after year after year after year after year after year after year who are performing the same way. At some point, it is about the system and the organization. And the silver lining is that, and I'm not doing this to get brownie points because I've given up on trying to get brownie points, right? When you're a superintendent, just be who you are. Is that I firmly believe unequivocally that we have an outstanding, in the 9 months I've been here, nothing has shifted the way in which at large we have an extraordinary staff who's ready to do this work. And the number of children, proportion to the population that we have to shift compared to other communities is extremely small. And when we look at the data and we share it to you, but if we share with you, let me tell you how many students that represent. Not only in the entire district, but if that's too large for you, let me take it to the building level. And if that's too large for you, let me take it inside the classroom. And then you're going to say, that's extremely manageable. And that's what we do, one student at a time, but it is going to require, if you want to move, what are the non-negotiables and move those barriers out of the way. Many of the things we've talked about in terms of those recommendations, we're moving in that particular area. So I challenge us as we continue this journey. Next month, we're gonna, on April 6th, we're gonna have another conversation and we're gonna splice the data every which way till Sunday to share with you where we are as a district, where we need to be, and the support that it's everyone's responsibility in order for us to get there. So at this point, it's really, if it hasn't been about keeping your eye on the prize, rolling up your sleeves, and focusing on these particular recommendations and other recommendations that will be coming in in the late spring with regards to that, because we do have to triangulate the data. So as much as it hurts my eyes and my team's eyes to look at some of these data points, it is refreshing in terms of the potential to pivot that.
All right. I think we know what our next steps are coming out of that. We need to clearly identify those non-negotiables. And as you said, Dr. Marseille, figure out how we make that manageable. I think your point is very well taken. It is something that student by student we can address. And I do want to emphasize a few words that you used in your comments around student, that it's not, how did you say it? Not historically underperforming students. Our students can all perform at an exceptional level. Everyone can. It's about giving them the opportunity to be able to do so and supporting them in that. And one of the things that worried me, frankly, when we first saw some of this data was how would I feel if I were that student or I was that family member of that student looking at this data. And aside from being pretty darn angry, you know, am I now that picture? And it's not a picture of underperformance. It's a picture of not of failing to serve and meet the needs. And that's not, I mean that in a collective way, in a community way, not just the school, but as a community, because we, as you said, very clearly, this is going to take a full community effort to be able to change. So thank you for your remarks. Any further comments? All right, I think we can thank our colleagues here from Hanover Research very much. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for doing the work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great night.
All right, moving to our health and safety plan update.
Yeah, thank you. We wanted to provide the board and give you an opportunity to speak to some of the conversations we continue to have with regard to health and safety plan. As I said earlier, though we are March 28th, moving towards the end of the year, there continues to be different perspective with respects to that. It looks like we may not have the health and safety plan uploaded onto the system. So someone on that end of the table needs to send that to all as soon as possible. As I'm reading the room, at least from my lens, it seems like that may not be the case. If not, then we will go off of the raw presentation, which is only a number of slides. Do you have that in front of you, Ms. Sweeney, or do you like
I
me to
do
give a
not, but I'm
copy?
okay.
Can you give Ms. Sweeney a copy of the report so she can go and use that as a reference? So what we wanted to share with you briefly in terms of where we are, as you know, we've come a long way. There's still some roads to travel. Still receiving concerns about going mask optional, still receiving concerns about physical distancing. However, we're still receiving emails from parents who are saying, okay, enough is enough with respects to where we are. When are we going to remove the mask? When are we going to remove other mitigation factors? Not only in lunchrooms, but in classrooms and almost every other setting. Well, February 7th, the district, the high school began mask optional. Since then, subsequently, 2 days later, we had NPE, and then after that, West, after that, the middle school, and the last school, which I have to tell you, based on the numbers and we were looking at, I was thinking, will SRS ever move below 2% over a 14-day period? They did that. And since then, and it's only been what, 10, 12 days since since March 3rd. Okay. And we have some numbers to show you where we've been as a district, and we're happy to see that. But there are some conversations that we've been having. You know, we use the word off-ramping a lot. Dr. Grande, I'm looking at you as I was doing that because I remember a while back, we were talking about, are there other transitions and when do we begin thinking about that? And members of the pandemic team, which are made up, once again, with Mrs. Gillespie, from the middle school nurse. We have Ms. Sweeney, who is our lead COVID nurse. We have Mary Fagora, who is our pandemic coordinator. The district identified that. We have our 2 directors of education who sit on that. We have our 2 directors of student services who sit on that committee. We have our HR director who sits on that committee. We have our athletic director who sits on that committee, and we have our director of operations who sits on that committee. Every Thursday we meet and we talk about what we are learning from our neighbors, what we're learning from health experts, and we extrapolate that to what does that mean for the district. So with that, what I want to do is pass it over to Mrs. Sweeney, who is going to share a little bit about where we are and what we've been thinking.
Okay, so obviously, we just wanted to take a minute to look at our vision statement, to go up a little bit, and our mission statement. And then we want to talk to you about the COVID update and the health and safety plan areas that we are looking at for review. But before we get started, as Dr. Marseille said, we wanted to look at the current district building incident rates. If you want to tap up, it's right there. Keep going up. No, wrong way. Go down right there. You can see that we still remain below 1% throughout the buildings, and that is true as of today as well. We're holding very steady and very well through the transition to mask optional. And the district level incident rates since the beginning of the school year, if we're looking at that, is 10.22. But over the last 2 weeks, we've only had 14 cases, which seems like a lot, but it's actually very low if you go back to the times when we had 14 a day. So we're doing very, very well, and that is across all buildings. If you look at the COVID county check, you can see that Delaware County is still saying that we are in low transmission levels. And if you aren't aware of what each of that says, the slide is here, as well as the reference to the CDC site that cites where the community level is. The next slide goes to us noting that, again, change is very difficult. And that is where we are, trying to decide how we want to make changes to what was the pre-pandemic lifestyle. So we need to decide how we're going to move forward. What is the safest way to move forward? And that is what we've been looking at and discussing through the pandemic team. Also, just as a side note, the health department is still not open. They are saying that they should be fully operational as of April 2nd. So we look forward for any guidance they might provide. But as of the current timeframe, we still are under the Department of Health. The areas that we looked at for review were non-essential visitors, assurance testing, physical distancing, and contact tracing. Non-essential visitors, it's been brought to our attention that several outside organizations and groups have requested use of our facilities, and we've been putting them off through the pandemic, as well as teachers requesting guest speakers. And with the low incident rates throughout the community, as well as our building incident rates, we thought maybe this is a good time to look into those areas. So we are in discussion about that. Assurance testing, CHOP Policy Lab indicated that assurance testing is no longer necessary during this time. So what we're looking at with insurance testing is if staff still wants to do it, we wanted to make it available to them. It is no longer mandatory, but they do have the opportunity to come to the Spencer House for the Test to Stay program, and we would provide them insurance testing at that location. We're also looking at physical distancing. Physical distancing, we want to see if that has any impact on the learning environment. And if so, is that a negative impact if we take it away? Is it a positive impact if we take it away? So we're still in discussions with that before we make any decisions, as well as contact tracing. Other of our surrounding districts have removed both the physical distancing aspect and the contact tracing. To either no physical distancing or contact tracing just in the large group settings, which would include the cafeteria and busing. So we're trying to see if we want to look or move in that direction. Timelines for moving in that area would minimally be 2 weeks after spring break. We want to look to see if any of the social gatherings or traveling or whatnot over spring break allows for any transmission spikes before we decide if we want to move as a community in a different direction. Do we have any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Sweeney. Quick question for you. In your discussions, two areas I was just curious to know if you were talking about. One, field trips, and I'm curious to know what your ideas are around field trips, especially at the elementary school level, and also seating plans also at the elementary school level. Have they come up for discussion as well?
First seating charts at this time, as long as there's contact tracing, you can't eliminate a seating chart. I would have no way to contact trace.
Sorry, my question was not phrased correctly. Seating in the cafeterias in the elementary schools. Have you discussed that?
Seating at the elementary levels of the cafeteria has not changed either at this point, but we will look into discussion. But as they move towards the outside, that would remain the same as during COVID, is offering that option to outside seating.
Okay, so
is my
So
understanding.
we're getting warmer, you think?
We're getting warmer. We'll talk about different options as we move forward. But we are looking at maintaining the outdoor activity if the building principals would be interested in that to continue.
So the question has come up by several community members with respects to why do we continue to have physical distancing in our lunch space? Our physical distancing has not changed since we came back. We have provided 3 feet to the greatest extent possible in our seating area. Many parents have shared, most recently, the last couple of days, which I've responded to, that it is time to begin shifting in a different direction. We do have the same way we have physical distancing inside our classrooms that we've had since school started. So there is a question about when are we going to pivot away from that and allow larger settings, students to sit together. There was conversation about the discrepancy between particular schools. The reality is all the elementary schools follow the same. You take a picture of a seating chart specific to cafeteria, it's identical to that, all elementary schools.
That is
The
correct.
question is, the high school, it does look a little bit different.
It does.
Implementation of anything looks a little bit different at the high school when it comes to that. So when individuals speak to the social gatherings, we've tried to say, make sure you're physically distanced. Maybe we've given up on that fight to some extent, trying to mitigate that. But we've always tried to stick with that. We are going to work to get 3 feet or to the greatest extent possible. I remember in the fall, there were questions about wanting to spread students out. And many parents were not comfortable with just 3 feet and they wanted 6 feet. And moving everyone to 6 feet did not have the square footage that was needed. So what did we do as a board? We authorized spending via ESSER dollars to buy tents to put outside, and we spread that out. And when Mother Nature graces us, we use that. Obviously, the winter season was a very different, and that was challenging for many families who wanted much larger spacing. And now that we're in the, not today though, because today's totally different. Tomorrow maybe too. But when the opportunity presents, we do that. But the conversation has been over the last couple of weeks. Is there room to begin thinking about shifting? When would that be? Having conversations with our colleagues who are right down the street, who have decided to move away from those mitigation factors. And we've asked, how are things going? What does that look like for you? Are you seeing any differences in that, in that process? And that's why we wanted to bring this to your attention, which was already scheduled 4 weeks ago. We said we were going to bring the health and safety plan as a pandemic team to that. So that's mine. And then I see there might be some other questions.
I'm sorry. What I understood though from the emails, it wasn't just the distancing, I think, that people were getting concerned about at the elementary level. It was that students were facing walls and not being allowed to even crane back and talk to somebody. So it wasn't the distance, it was the lack of being able to interact. And actually, who wants to sit there staring at a wall?
I don't know who's
Unable to
staring.
move their head.
I don't know who's
So I
staring
think
at a
that
wall.
was
I don't
At
know.
least 2 emails.
I understand that, but I think those are specific questions that need to be addressed by the principals. If that is actually happening, then those parents can speak to the principals. All of the tables, if you've been to our lunchroom, those 8-foot tables, per information we've been receiving from the beginning about facing in the same direction as a mitigation strategy. We've kept that throughout that process. Now, the extent in which someone is sitting directly in front of a wall, I can't speak to that. If you look at the spacing, if that is happening, then we have our parents contact that particular principal. But you've seen the square footage and the layout of each of our particular cafeterias.
And as far
It
as
was field trips. yeah,
field
it was-
trips,
yes,
and as far as field trips, we have relooked at the way that they are being addressed by the pandemic team. We're looking for those trips that are overnight, as well as those trips that have COVID restrictions on the opposite side for the venue that the individual will be going to. So those trips that do not need to come before the pandemic team have reverted to pre-pandemic approval process. Most of all of the field trips that have been presented spring from the elementary levels have gone directly back to the principals. There have not been any that have been turned down once we switched to this procedure. The only one that I'm aware of was one that was previously presented in the fall that did not have COVID capability of what would happen once they were there, should they return, how that would be done safely. They didn't have a plan for how to handle that. And that was where they were having some dynamic issues there. That is the only one that I'm aware of that was not able to be processed.
Ms. Burke?
So any variability among elementary schools related to field trips is due to, you know, what each school is deciding to do with
That
their
is
various
correct.
grades.
My understanding is some
not-
of the teachers at this point are looking into what is available and what is comfortable to take the children to. So that's where they're still in the deciding factors, they're in the planning stages. I think that perhaps they might have earlier rescinded the idea and now are relooking at those trips to see whether or not they're feasible.
And I did want to just take a moment to thank you and the entire team for truly threading the needle on this. I mean, we had districts that went ahead of us and districts that, you know, came behind us, but I thought that the team did this in a very thoughtful way. And I think I expressed it to you, you know, a couple months ago that I was worried about kind of a bumpy landing where we might have to go back and forth and who wants that, and you know, but we didn't, and thankfully that just hasn't been the case. So I'm very happy about that. I'm crossing my fingers that we can all make it through this next variant that is quickly encroaching without having to go back to, you know, additional measures. But I'm hopeful the numbers look good still. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One question, I think if I'm not mistaken, that the CDC just recently dropped their recommendation for contact tracing, except in high-risk settings. They mentioned nursing facilities, or I forget what the other.
They
one
call
was.
it close congregate settings.
Yes,
Which
yes.
would be where our other districts surrounding us have taken that information and said, okay, that is your cafeterias and your busing,
Okay.
but they're no longer doing classrooms.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
I just also wanted to thank you all. I know you take your lumps through all of this, many lumps. But, you know, I think that all in all, you know, the changes that you've helped shepherd through, we had a pretty rocky Omicron wave where I know many people were working overtime to get us through that. But we never had to close, and kids got to come to school. And I think, you know, we did a great job with trying to create continuity of education through what was a very challenging time period for all districts. So we're at a different place now. And I'm, hopeful that we're able to continue to normalize things for kids. I think we're really far in that process. I think that for a lot of kids, school feels a lot like it used to. Not 100% of the way there, but we will get there. But again, I want to thank you in particular, but the entire administration for helping shepherd us through all of this.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we will now move on into our agenda. And so in board announcements, I do not have any board announcements this evening. And so that takes us to audience recognition, and we'll begin with response to items for action on the agenda. So this is the time where we give an opportunity for public comment for items that are on the agenda. We will have time later for topics not on the agenda. And as a reminder, public comment is a time for district residents and taxpayers to speak to the board about an issue that is before the board or may come before the board. It's a time for us to listen and hear perspectives and experiences from our community. And while we can't necessarily answer questions during the meeting, there's always an opportunity for follow-up after meetings if there are specific questions. Is there anyone who would like to speak this evening on a topic that is on the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, I'd also like to move that we move up the time on the agenda for public comment for items that are not for action this evening, given that we only have one community member here. Is there another person? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you over there. So I think it would make sense for us to move it up. So I'd like to make a motion to adjust the agenda to move public comment on items not for action to now. So I so move. Yes. Yes. Second. Any comments or questions? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right, so at this time we have the opportunity for comments for items that are not on the agenda for action tonight. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Okay, and we will still recognize the 3-minute limit.
Of course.
And so we'll give you the heads up. If you could just state your name and your street, please.
Yes, of course. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Good evening, school board and Dr. Marseille. I'm Robert Cristaldi of Putnam Boulevard in Wallingford. Thank you, Mrs. Walkman, for moving up the public comment. Dr. Marseille.
We know you have a lot of homework to do.
Yes, while I have had many reservations on the equity audit, I want to thank Dr. Marseille. I think you made some really good points. I've been listening and I am going to take a look at the data later on. I was originally opposed to the idea back in, I think in September. While my time in the district is closing, it'll be over in less than 3 months. I think I can provide some valuable data, even though this valuable info, even though the policies will not affect me. I spent 2 years at MPE, I spent 3 years at SRS, and I spent 3 years at the middle school, and then I spent 3.5 years at the high school. The last 12 years has been full of love and learning, and I've received a lot of support. Please keep in mind it isn't all bleak, as the Hanover research team said. I think we're ignoring some of the positives our district has that weren't mentioned. I want to state that while, yes, we do need to quickly move on the non-negotiables, we must not move too quickly because we could destabilize a system that has stood for decades that I think has worked for the most part pretty well. I'm concerned that we're going to end up adopting an affirmative action style system where we push certain students through just to check off a box or two, and that wouldn't be right. That wouldn't be fair to them, and it wouldn't be fair to everyone else. According to Hanover, these problems and some students have exist from kindergarten. That means they come to the district with these problems, and that's not our fault. Failure to read on grade level, especially in kindergarten in the first few years, is not a failure of our district for the most part. And I hate to say it's a failure of our parents. I ask you to keep that in mind. If we want to discuss equity, I'm deeply concerned about the lack of speed with removal of COVID restrictions. We've been finally beginning to move faster with that. Every year, every month, and every day is critical in elementary school. I remember being in the elementary school that was 10 years ago. Physical distancing, contact tracing has to go. The kids need to be able to interact once again. I'm glad the board's finally beginning to move faster on this, seemingly. Now that would be equitable. In the end, I'll support this equity. This equity audit has been great. To quote President Bush when he signed the ADA, I'm glad that finally the shameful wall of exclusion will finally come tumbling down. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Mr. Cristaldi. And I know we're coming to the nearing the end of your career here in the district. I don't know if we'll see you in the coming meetings, but I wanted to simply thank you for being a regular presence at our meetings and for having the courage to talk to us. And I know we don't always agree, but I really respect that you have been here and a frequent voice for students. Thank you. Any other comments this evening? Okay. Dr. Marcy.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment if I can follow in your footsteps. And I think that our students who are watching, those who may not, can learn from Mr. Cristaldi. As I have shared, and you just shared, and we've had not only public conversations, but private conversations. There are things where we find commonality, right? And things where we're like water and oil, right? But in that spirit of communication, we've gotten to know each other. And what I respect is his ability to be passionate about particular subjects and leveraging his knowledge and his expertise and his courage to come to these particular meetings. And I think that not only can students learn from that, but adults can learn from that, right? So there's this thing about advocacy. And I appreciate the advocacy here. Like when people come out, not that I don't mind the more emails that I could possibly read, all right? And I keep telling this board, you shouldn't pay a superintendent that much money to respond to emails. It flies in the face in terms of what I began as a classroom teacher was be deeply connected in instruction and teaching and learning, right? But I appreciate the ability to come to the meeting. And I know it's difficult for a lot of individuals. We heard that in the Hanover report in terms of how do we make it more accessible? How do we make it easier? I know that Lilia and Sylvia Marseille would not be coming to any meetings. They had two jobs, right? And even if they could, they wouldn't understand the English anyway, so they're not native English speakers. But I go back to Mr. Cristaldi in terms of the lesson that we can learn that our students can value from that experience, and to come out here and share his perspectives and share with those who are in leadership positions, making decisions that have us think differently and agree or disagree. No one walks out of here without thinking about the statements that were made and what does that mean for me. So I want to echo what you said, Ms. Walkman, and thank him for his leadership and his advocacy, and hoping that we give that forum, just like we did with GSA and others to come, but to come, not just, though I know all the students have a lot of things to do at night, but I love his resolve in terms of, quite honestly, I've seen him here more. To some, let me look in the camera, to some of the parents who email me and express concern, right? I hear your voice via the but I don't see you here. I welcome that. I want to put a name and a face to some of the communications. I think that's okay to do that. So thank you very much for being an example in terms of your advocacy.
All right. We will continue. And so we're back to our next action for item on the agenda this evening, which is the approval of the February 28th, 2022 regular business meeting. Can't talk tonight, regular business meeting. Do I have a motion for approval of the meeting minutes?
So moved.
Dr. Grandi. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Holbert, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, Ms. Figueroa, will you please take the roll call?
Mr. Henry,
Aye.
Ms. Holbert,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Ms. Vogt, Ms. Witset, Ms. Bukowski Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy,
Aye.
Ms. Walkman.
Aye.
The minutes pass 8-0.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move into board committee reports, and I'm going to remind my colleagues that we're aiming for a little more brevity this evening than in some of our prior meetings. While we appreciate the completeness of the reports, there are opportunities, of course, for district families who might be watching to both look at our minutes that are published online, and also we always invite you to attend our robust conversation in our meetings. But we'll begin with education affairs and Mr. Henry. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so you'll, Madam President, you'll be happy that I'll be very brief because the Education Affairs Committee that we held on March 2nd, we discussed the findings of the equity audit that everyone just saw. So I will not repeat all of that. But they presented a very similar, a little bit longer presentation. We had a very robust discussion amongst the committee members and the board members and the public that were there, which I thought was very good. And finally, which I particularly appreciated, was Dr. Marseille, Dr. Jones, and Dr. Marskowski concluded with the presentation with next steps, which was good for us to hear. And I will echo Dr. Marseille's plea, if that's the right word, for people to come to the next Educational Affairs meeting because it is important information. We do have a nice, it's a more informal atmosphere, and we can chat and we can talk about and answer questions and that kind of thing. So I encourage that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Facilities and finance, is that Mr. Cutis? Thank you.
Good evening. On March 16th, we met in the middle school. There's a combined committee that performs both for the Facilities Committee and the Finance Committee. Mr. Kolbunde led the Facilities Committee. Committee meetings were, committee meeting minutes were approved. Items discussed included operation accomplishments since the last meeting and an update on the implementation of security recommendations. Mr. Kolbunde then briefed on the capital projects currently underway: the high school secure entrances, the swimming pool scoreboard replacement, the WES partial roof replacement, the solar panel project. He then discussed the proposed projects to include the Trinity window and roof replacements, the SRS exterior structural crack repairs, the SRS electrical and lighting controls integration, the SRS playground turnstile installation, the high school asphalt maintenance, the high school auditorium light and sound controls, the middle school repair of auditorium sound controls, the middle school access controls, and the high school and middle school marquee signs. Mr. Kolbunde also gave us an update on grants and rebates that he's been researching for various school improvement projects. Ms. Martin led the Finance Committee. Items discussed included a 5-year budget and fund balance projections under 2 different scenarios: Act 1 index remaining at 3.4%, and then with a 3.9% increase in personnel costs. Both projections were showing deficits. A 10-year projection was also presented to show the restoration of the fund balance after the debt service winds down beginning in 2028. There was a discussion of potential areas that could be trimmed to help reduce the projected deficits, including restructuring of debt. The district currently has an AA rating and the importance of maintaining a healthy fund balance was stressed. Ms. Martin then discussed the projected 2022-2023 budget, noting that updates have narrowed the deficit by another $60,000. Ms. Martin went over the remaining calendar dates for the budget planning process, noting the board will receive detailed budget binders by April 1st. Lastly, Ms. Martin discussed items that would be on the March 28th board meeting agenda for approval, including the Spencer House lease, bus lease, and DCIU budget items.
Thank you, Mr. Kudos. Now, an update on policy, and Ms. Witkowski-Smith, I think you're taking that one.
Yes. Okay. Yes. On February 23rd, 2022, the policy committee and members of the community were invited to meet in room B226 in the middle school at 7 p.m. In attendance of the committee were Ms. Witkowski-Smith, Mrs. Walkman, Ms. Lentz. Administrative chairs were present were Dr. Egg Little, Dr. Sandberg, our superintendent of schools, Dr. Marseille was there, as well as our solicitor, Mr. Berman. The minutes were approved 3-0. First for consideration was policy 239 concerning international students, which had previously been approved to be submitted for consideration by the full board at a legislative meeting, was revisited and revised to reflect minor changes in languages. Following these changes, it was again approved to be submitted for a vote by the full board of directors at the next legislative meeting. Policy 239.1 was brought to the policy committee for a second time with a recommendation to be repealed. Mr. Berman and Dr. Citarelli-Jones, who was also present for the meeting to discuss relevant policies, discussed why policy 239.1 was obsolete and no longer applies to current district practices. It was recommended to advance it for a vote to repeal the next full legislative meeting. Policy 104 concerning equal opportunity and non-discrimination in employment practice was brought to the policy committee for a second reading. The committee agreed, following its previous revisions made in the policy committee meeting in January, to advance policy 104 to the full board of directors for approval at the next legislative meeting. Presentation of policies 108 concerning the adoption of textbooks and 109 concerning resource materials followed as a first reading and review of those policies by the committee. Significant revisions to both policies and discussion took place specific to the definition of textbooks and resource materials, the criteria that ought to be used to select them, and finally, the procedure for complaints regarding their adoption. Following these suggested revisions, the policy committee agreed to advance policies 108 and 109 to the next policy committee meeting for second readings. Finally, the preparation for future consideration of a cell phone policy took place. Board Chair Mrs. Lentz discussed her rationale for such a policy, as well as suggested a beginning point for consideration, which included research of recent policies adopted in other districts, as well as recommended guidance on behalf of the Pennsylvania School Board Association. Regarding the school-based cell phone policy, it was agreed that Mrs. Lentz would bring further resource materials for consideration to the next policy meeting. The meeting adjourned, and we are hoping for everyone to attend the next meeting, which will be held on April 27th.
Thank you. Would you like to continue then with Pennsylvania School Board Association?
Just a few highlights from Pennsylvania school boards. And the first one is really in relationship to our state standardized testing. And they made a statement that pandemic-related inconsistencies make comparison of the results between schools across districts or across school years improper and inaccurate. So they made that statement. PSBA acknowledges this month's release by the PA Department of Education of the 2021 statewide assessment results, emphasizing that the impact of extensive pandemic-related disruptions makes use of the data to draw conclusions about the performance of school districts during the pandemic invalid and inappropriate. PDE Deputy Secretary for Elementary and Secondary Education, Sherry Smith, said that given these circumstances, the results should not be viewed as complete representative sample of all students in the Commonwealth, nor should a single assessment during an atypical school year be considered as true metric of student performance. The assessment results appear in the Future Ready PA Index. While 2021 state assessment results may have some usefulness for evaluating academic impacts within a given school or school entity, They should not be used to make generalized statements or determinations about the performance of public school students. A more accurate picture of the pandemic's impact on learning is through diagnostic assessments administered locally by each child's school. Their second impact was on teacher and personnel shortage. And the concern is that according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 575,000 fewer local and state education employees in the US in October of 2021 than in February of 2020. So we're looking at a very short time. That included a net loss of 65,000 public education workers between September and October of 2021. That's 1 month's time. In the 2010 to 2011 academic year, Pennsylvania granted 21,045 new education certificates, basically a state license that says a graduate's qualified to teach. By the 2019-2020 academic year, that figure had dropped to just below 7,000. So teachers in the pipeline are scarce. That drop wasn't fueled by the pandemic. In the 3 years before COVID arrived, Pennsylvania granted an average of 7,350 education certificates per year. So we're pretty low. So the most difficult positions to staff are special education, substitute teachers, secondary math, secondary science, and speech therapists. It's concluded.
It's rather sobering.
Yeah.
All right, we'll continue. Do we have any wellness advisory updates tonight? No wellness. April 26th is the next meeting? Okay, at 4 o'clock. Okay, thank you. Delaware County Community College Liaison, looking the wrong way, Ms. Oliver.
Yeah, I have a quick update. Last week, as the DCCC liaison, I had the opportunity with 4 others to interview candidates for the DCCC Board of Trustees, which will soon have 2 openings. We interviewed 4 candidates and chose 2 who are highly qualified and will bring their strengths to major decisions as DCCC continues to move forward. Each individual sponsoring school board needs to affirm our choices. So next month, I will be bringing forward a resolution for the board to vote on.
Thank you, Ms. Holbert. Delaware County Intermediate Unit update, Mr. Acutis.
At the board meeting on March 2nd, the board members approved the DCIU operations budget, their special ed budget and service agreements, and the DCTS operations budget. I'm happy to say that the contribution from Wallingford-Swarthmore School District has been fairly static for the past couple of years. So there's generally no changes again for the coming school year.
All right, thank you, Mr. Acutis. And finally, Delaware County School Board Legislative Council, Ms. Whitsett. No update this evening. Okay, thank you very much. All right, moving on then. In personnel, we have 9 items for action in personnel. Are there any items on the list that anyone on the board would like to separate from the rest? Okay, seeing none. Here we go. In administrative positions, we have the resignation of Mary Figura, assistant to the superintendent. In certified staff, we have the retirement of Mr. Henry Perlberg, music director and teacher at Strathaven Middle School. Whoops, sorry. We have the retirement of Miss Christine Kimball Kelly, world language teacher, Strathaven High School. The retirement of Jeffrey Shaw, instrumental music teacher at SRS. Retirement of Cheryl Hendershot in the art department at NPE. Retirement of Colette Sabatina, school psychologist at Strathaven Middle School. The retirement of Maria Klump, school psychologist at NPE. And the resignation of Andrew Carney, special education teacher at the middle school. In non-certified staff, we have the retirement of Carol Pike, nurse at NPE. the resignation of Erica Tyson, Administrative Assistant at the high school, the retirement of Michael Meyer, bus driver in the Transportation Department, the resignation of Hannah Toma, Instructional Support at the high school, pardon me, and the retirement of Jacqueline DeWitt, Instructional Support at NPE. In appointments, we have the appointment of Kelly Caulfield, part-time instructional support lunchtime monitor at the middle school. We have the approval of 2 leaves of absence as listed on the agenda. We have the approval of the resignation of Mary Fagora as board secretary effective April 28th, 2022. We have the approval of the payment of unused sick days for 3 retirees as stipulated. We have the ratification of the contract for Christopher High School chemistry teacher at the high school who is eligible for tenure as stipulated. We have the approval of the 2021-2022 spring athletic supplemental appointments as stipulated. We have the approval of the 2021-2022 activity supplemental appointments as stipulated. We have the approval of additions to the 2021-2022 conference requests as stipulated. And all items in this section are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion? So moved. Ms. Holbert. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Vogt? Any discussion? All right, Ms. Fagora, could you please take the roll call vote?
Ms. Holbert,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Ms. Vogt,
Aye.
Ms. Witset, Ms. Wachowski Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy,
Aye.
Mr. Henry,
Aye.
Ms. Walkman.
Aye.
Personnel items pass 8-0.
Thank you. Moving to policies, we have 3 policies for this evening. We have 2 policies presented for adoption. Those are policy 104, equal opportunity and non-discrimination in employment practices, policy 108, textbooks, and policy 109, curricular materials. We also have for repeal, we have 1 policy, policy 011, board governance standards, code of conduct presented for repeal. Do I have a motion? Thank you, Ms. Wachowski Smith. And do I have a second?
Second.
Dr. Grande? Any discussion? None? Okay, Ms. Fagora, can you please take the roll call?
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Ms. Vogt,
Aye.
Ms. Witset, Ms. Wachowski Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy,
Aye.
Mr. Henry,
Aye.
Ms. Holbert,
Aye.
Ms. Walkman.
Aye.
Policies pass 8-0.
Thank you, Ms. Fagora. In curriculum, we have 3 items for action. Are there any items on the list anyone on the board would like to separate from the rest? Seeing none, we have the approval of a recommended change to the 2021-2022 school calendar to observe the federal Juneteenth holiday on Monday, June 20th. The previously approved 2021-2022 calendar had Monday, June 20th as an in-service day for teachers. We have the approval of the Community of Explorers Summer Program for elementary students currently in kindergarten through 4th grade, as described in the agenda and as discussed here this evening, funding for which will come from ESSER ARP grants. And we have 1 Category 1 overnight field trip for the 2021-2022 school year as stipulated. All items in the section are as attached or as described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Cutis. And that was Mr. Henry. Thank you. In discussion, Dr. Marseille, I just would like to confirm in terms of the 2021-22 calendar, no impact on students at all. And to the extent there's an impact on teachers, it's simply that we're observing that day as rather instead of an in-service day, we're observing the 20th as a holiday.
Yes,
Juneteenth holiday.
it wasn't recognized on the calendar as published. So as a result, I believe the teachers normally would have a flex. Those last 2 days, the 21st and the 22nd were flex days. But as a result of the recognition of the federal holiday, we had to move that down. So our staff will recognize the 21st and 22nd as their flex days.
Thank you. Any other discussion? If not, Ms. Fedor, could you please take the roll call?
Ms. Vogt,
Aye.
Ms. Witsat, Ms. Wachowski Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy,
Aye.
Mr. Henry,
Aye.
Ms. Holbert,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Ms. Walkman,
Aye.
curriculum items pass 8-0.
Thank you. In student services, we have 4 items for approval. Are there any items on the list anyone on the board would like to separate from the rest? Seeing none. First, we have 2021-2022 related service provider contracts, the approval of the related service provider contracts for 5 students for the 2021-2022 school year. We have the approval of a contract with Effective School Solutions for the 2022-2023 school year to provide district-wide Tier 3 supports. We have the approval of a 2021 extended school year contract for 1 student as stipulated. And we have the approval of an education service agreement for 1 student as stipulated. All items in this section are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Wachowski Smith. Do I have a second?
Second.
Was that Ms. Holbert? Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, Ms. Fedor, can you take the roll call, please?
Ms. Witsat, Ms. Wachowski Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy,
Aye.
Mr. Henry,
Aye.
Ms. Holbert,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Ms. Vogt,
Aye.
Ms. Walkman.
Aye.
Student services items pass 8-0.
Thank you. In finance, we have 11 items for approval. Are there any items on the list anyone would like to separate? Okay. First, we have approval of payments to vendors from February 19th, 2022 through March 18th, 2022 as stipulated. We have acknowledgement of receipt of the February 2022 financial statements for funds 10, 32, 51, and 81 as stipulated. We have the acknowledgement of receipt of the treasurer's report for February 2022. We have the approval of budget transfers as stipulated. We have the approval of the Delaware County Intermediate Unit General Operating Budget for the 2022-2023 school year as stipulated. We have the approval of the Delaware County Intermediate Unit Special Education Funding and Service Agreement for the 2022-2023 school year as stipulated. We have the approval of the Delaware County Area Technical Schools Budget Resolution for the 2022-2023 school year as stipulated. We have the approval of the lease with Dr. Strain and Dr. Christie beginning June 1st, 2022 as stipulated. We have the approval of the lease of 11 buses from Wolfington Santander as stipulated, subject to review by the district solicitor. We have approval of the contract with Windstream to replace phone services for 3 years as stipulated. We have the approval of the sale of 2 used copiers to TTR Shipping for $2,300 each. All items in this section are as attached or as described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Grande. A second? Ms. Witsat. Thank you. Any discussion? Figueroa, Ms. Figueroa, can you please take the roll call?
Ms. Wachowski Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy,
Aye.
Mr. Henry,
Aye.
Ms. Holbert,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Ms. Witsat,
Aye.
Oh, Dr. Grande, I'm sorry. I crossed off Ms. Lentz, and I crossed off Dr. Grande. Dr. Grande.
I thought I voted aye.
Oh,
haven't
you
voted.
did. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Ms. Vogt. I apologize. And Ms. Walken.
Aye. It's late and our strange round robin way we do that is
Yes,
confusing.
and Dr. Grande's in there twice. Sorry.
All right, takes us to old business. Do we have any old business this evening? None. Do we have any new business this evening? Okay. Thank you then. This meeting is adjourned.